Okay, my friends, get ready. They think Stonehenge is some kind of celestial observatory, and people gather there all the time to watch from the Heelstone. This is hysterical, really. The Heelstone, what's it? A Heelstone indicates a foot. It's way outside the Stonehenge circle, but they gather at the Heelstone to see these celestial events. Let me show you what the Heelstone is. It's very comical, actually. Okay, my friends, get ready. This is the Heelstone, and it is a foot. These are the toes, and I can say that with 100% certainty. You see these little spots right there? You see those little spots? There's one here, and they're up on the ends of these toes as well. These toes are eroded, obviously, but this was a major blood supply, and these are the veins and arteries at the ends of the toes. And that's what this is the end of the toe where the vein and the artery come out. And I can show you that anatomically is exactly correct. Now it appears that this was laying on its side this way when it died in the Great Flood, and it is because that's flat as a pancake. And all of my stuff is like that. And I have stuff that's DNA tested, CAT scanned, everything else, and most of them have a flat side. So I imagine it was laying like this. Again, blood, 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 all the way across the tips. This, I believe, was where the vein came down, and it's the black blood. Now let me show you why I make these statements, and I can make them stick. Okay, my friends, this is really crazy, but it is just a fact. Everybody knows about Stonehenge, and they think it's something to do with solar alignments. Well, let's talk about that. It said every midsummer's night, 10,000s of people gather at Stonehenge to celebrate and witness the rising sun in alignment with the Heelstone. The Heelstone, standing way outside of the circle. 6 months later, a smaller crowd congregates around the Heelstone to witness the midwinter sun setting within the stone circle. So they're standing way out here where the Heelstone is. They're looking at the sun coming up in the middle of this structure. Apparently, that's the way I take it. Well, let me tell you what the Heelstone is and what the structure is. Okay, this is the Heelstone ditch. That's where the Heelstone is. Against the Heelstone ditch is rammed chalk-filled stone hole 97, whose missing stone is known as Heelstone's twin. It's 2 feet, and that's the twin. One of them's missing, and it was called the twin stone. All right, don't forget the blood at the tips of the toes and a major confluence of blood right down here as they enter the whole toe area. Here it is right here. See the tips of these are the bloods. The artery comes down to red, and it comes down back to the blue. And it's eroded down to where you can see the tips of the blood vessels. That's all it is. And there's major amounts of blood right in this area that transfer. You see these 2 little spots here? You see right here? Same thing. There's just no question about it. It's zero question about this. None. Now, this is where you say, oh, Roger, they couldn't be that big. Yes, they could. This actually, Stonehenge, the guy was a puppy. This right here is a hair follicle. All right? Here's what a hair follicle is right here. Now, I don't know what kind of creature this was from, but I don't really care. It's 2 inches wide. Ours is 2/1000ths of an inch wide. This is 1,000 times bigger than a human hair. All right, so if it was human, which I don't know, the guy would have been a mile tall. Stonehenge, a little puppy guy, 50, 100 feet tall, whatever. I have him taller than that right here on my own property. DNA tested. I'll show you in a second. This is right here where the erector pili muscle attaches. There's the hair shaft, right there, coming right up the top. This is the sebaceous gland, right there. This is the hair root coming down, and at the very bottom, those two little dots there are the vein and the artery. This is a hair follicle. Now, I have other ones here on my own property. I had DNA tested and CAT scanned. Now, don't forget, I discovered mud fossils. I named mud fossils mud fossils. I did all the research years and years ago. And this is one of the first things I found was this fingertip. That's the back of the fingertip. And that little round disc there is the thing that goes in between the bones. I'll show you that in an x-ray in a second. This is the fingernail. That whole thing is a fingernail. When I first found this, it was completely perfect. There was no broken piece here. But I could see that there was no way I was going to get any blood out of this. And to get the blood, you have to go down inside. So I smacked it with a hammer, and it popped right off like a scab, because that's the way the skin is. It's basically glued. There's a membrane, and then below that is where all the blood is. Let me show you that. Okay, you see it right here? This peeled right off. This just peeled, I hit it, and it just popped right off. And that's because it's completely different than the underneath, which has all the blood and a lot of blood. This has no blood whatsoever. So this piece right here, these are the finger ridges. You see it? That's the sweat pores. And when I looked at it in a microscope, you can see it pretty well. But underneath, there was plenty of blood. This is the piece right here. This is the piece, and that's where the fingernail rides right here, and immediately your fingerprints start right there. All right. Now underneath, this popped off just like a scab. You see that? It wasn't even attached. It just was pop, and it popped right off. And inside, down in here, there was plenty of blood. You know, red. You know, blood that's dried out. And you just drill into the artery and then take it out and send it off to get it tested for DNA, and it was human mitochondrial DNA. So don't forget, I drilled down in there. So this was not exposed whatsoever. I was careful when I did it. I used clean tools and all that, and it came back dense, excellent quality DNA from this. Now remember that piece right here? And these little blood vessels right there, the vein and artery. Let me show you what it looks like in this. There's that little round piece, you see? There's that little round piece. They all have one in between each bone. And they use these in StoneHenge. I'll show you these right here. And they have fingertips and everything in StoneHenge. Nobody pays any attention to what's there. See that? That's just one of those little things right in between the bones. This thing was gigantic. I mean, it was good size, not anywhere close to the ones that I have here on my own property. The one I have on my own property is not this big, because this is a fingertip. You see that? That's the fingernail. That's the fingertip. The reason this is all green stuff, because there's blood still. Wherever there was good blood supply, and the fingers and stuff are saturated with blood, their green stuff will grow into there. It loves blood. Now that right there is also blood. Now this, I think, is the underside of a fingertip. In other words, this one is laying this way and you can see the fingernail. This one is this way and you can see the blood that's coming up underneath. And this is a cap between some bones that rock against each other. All of this stuff is bones. Well, no, actually completely preserved body parts. And they show, you know, they didn't all die at the same time. There was giants here after the giants died in the flood. Some of them were preserved, apparently. And some of them apparently built StoneHenge. Now, I don't know if this picture is accurate or not, but it's possible. I mean, they did this somehow. They did that somehow. That was not just fell there by accident. This was a memorial to a giant. It's a memorial to a giant. He was probably the guy that ruled this area. He died. And somehow the smaller giants made a memorial to him. An average person's not going to be able to do this. If they didn't have any kind of equipment, that's not going to happen. How are you going to do that? These big slabs, putting them in here. You know, people, you know, they were pretty tricky. They might have been able to do it. Who cares? These were giants. That's all I care about. All right, I had 3 things DNA tested. This is one of them. This is a fingertip. And right there, I broke this piece off. All right, so I could get down and see the bone. And you can actually see the bone in here with the microscope. You can tell the structure of the bone. And that's where that was. Now, here's where the blood is. I showed you on the StoneHenge one. You got to put a little water on it to bring out the effect. Now, this, you see right here, that little hook right here? How perfectly set in that is? That's where the tendon locks in. And both of these sides here are also tendons, here and here. And they have blood supplies along with them. Now, I had this CAT scanned as well as DNA tested. It's human, there's no question about it. And it is exactly identical. Having that, this is where the tendons lock in. I'll show you right now. But this was the DNA test, and there was 3 of them done. I had a 36-inch fingertip, the huge one I showed, a lung that was flawless. Wait a minute, here it is right here. Ugh. It's just perfect. There's nobody in the world can say that's not a human lung. All right, and it's flat as a pancake on the back. This is where the heart would have been. The guy died laying like this. Everything disassociated because of the giant flood. This is saturated with blood. I drilled in here. I think I drilled maybe in there somewhere. This goes back over 10 years ago. Well, 10 years ago. And I had it DNA tested and actually CAT scanned too. I had 7 things CAT scanned and 3 things DNA tested. So the mud tip was this. The lung I just showed you, and a 36-inch tip was that big one. And here's what this was very, very detailed, very detailed. And there was no contamination, they said. And there was excellent quality DNA obtained for the 36-inch tip in a lung sample. This one didn't have as strong of DNA because it's completely transitioned. Completely transitioned. This still has a lot of the organic matter in their blood and everything else. It's red. It's just still saturated with blood. And that giant fingertip, when I went inside of it, it was just like raw blood almost. It wasn't wet, but it was all of that. And here we are, Homo sapien mitochondria. So all of this stuff about StoneHenge, by the way, here's where that locks in. Remember I said, oh, this here. There it is right there. That's how it locks in right at the edge of the fingertip. That's the tendons. And they run back. And that allows you to do all kinds of things. Your fingertips and your toes and everything. The human body is absolutely fascinating. That's why I'm so deep into this. I can't, it's just almost impossible to believe the complexity of the human body. And then you get into all the bacteria and the enzymes and the membranes and the tendons and the muscles and everything's different. But I can tell you what isn't different is this right here is a foot. And that right there is the tip of a toe, the blood coming out of the end of the toe, just as this right here, if this eroded down, you'd see the 2 little spots. And they're all over the place. And then there's big chunks of blood coming down here. All right, and that's very, very, very easy to see. This is where the main blood supply comes down, so it filters around there. And these are it's blood. StoneHenge is a memorial to a giant. That's a fingertip right there. And that right there is a plate between some big fingers, much bigger than this one. So this is a conglomeration, apparently to me it looks like. Although this could be somewhere else in the body, I don't know. But I can tell you what, this is all body parts. And if you wanted, you could probably test this stuff. Drill a little hole inside to where that red blood is. You know, you got to get off of the surface. You can't just swab it off the surface. But if you drilled into one of these little holes in here and got inside and then took some of that, you could probably test it and see what kind of a human being it was from. Mine are from Homo sapiens, modern Homo sapien mitochondrial DNA. That's what I was told. And this guy did a fabulous job. Fabulous. And it took a couple of months to do it, and it was PCR DNA tested. That's top end stuff. And then I had 3 or 7 CAT scans done by Jesse Garant and Associates, some of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. And they did both the 2D and the 3D. Here's the 3D. You can't see as much with the 3D. All right, all you can see is you can see the bone shadow right there. And then you can see all these little holes coming up through. This is where the blood supplies come up. You know, I understand it. You just can't see it like you would. Oh boy, I can see everything inside. No, the best was the 2D. See this here? This you would never see the fingernail. You'd never see that fingernail was there. But here you can see it. You see it? That right there is where the fingernail was. All right, and this again is this here, right here. See, on the side is where that latched in. Yeah, I have so much of this stuff. This is lung. It's from I don't know what kind of creature. And the silicates filled in where the big holes were left over. But that lung was pretty much intact. It has that scruffy little thing on the end. They all have that, the lungs. That's a latch that holds it in. This one has the same thing. But this is a human one. Now this I don't think was human. It looks, I don't know. I don't know what they were. There was all kinds of creatures here. And these are supposedly from creatures that were here before there was any, they don't understand it. Let me put it that way. They have no clue and they don't want to know because it just destroys everything they've told us about our history. Every single thing. Everything. All right, I'm going to leave it at that. All right, this was my paper from 2015 after I had everything done, the CAT scans, the DNA tests. I've been about 5 years into it by then. And this was a paper I wrote. Mud fossils are exact copies of the original creatures. All right, the fascia facilitates the fossilization because it's made of collagens, and they're a fabric. The kerogens and collagens create a fabric, which is a fibrous elastins in a sheet that wraps everything individually and then comes together as one giant system. It's now called the interstitial fluid-filled highway. There's over 20 types of each collagen and kerogen. Some protect from acids, others from caustics, others mineralized for strength, and the variety is amazing. The fibers are infused with silicon. My mud fossils. This is from the paper. Fascia is a tubular, fluid-filled fabric network. They call it now the interstitium. Just recently, in 2018, they agreed, yes.
Once you know the truth, there is no excuse. Once you know the truth, there is no excuse.
Okay, this is from Yale. This is a year after I submitted all my work to this guy, Derek Briggs, at Yale. And they took credit for my work. This is almost identical to a paper I just submitted. I just showed you. Exceptional preservation. Exceptional of soft-bodied creatures. No, they weren't all soft-bodied. They were soft tissues, yes, but there was bones. And there was all the things that I just showed you, lungs and everything. Gigantic creatures, gigantic, huge things. That's what turned them off. They did, right away, he called me a creationist and all kinds. We didn't get along well at all. And so anyway, exceptional preservation, yes, of Etacarta. They just named it that so they could take credit for it. This is someplace in Australia or somewhere. Promoted by silica-rich oceans. The entire world was covered with ocean at this time because it was from the Great Flood, exactly what Velikovsky said. So it's time we take these people to account. This is not right. He shouldn't have done that. And you know who paid them for it? NASA. And the reason NASA paid them to do this research was because I went to NASA too. And I said, on Mars, there is things that I'm going to tell you right now. There's no question. A Mars crab, Mars Morse code, Mars blueberries, they're all biological. And I sent them all the evidence of that. Next thing I know, they fund NASA, funds Yale to do the work I had already done. You see this? This is in 2016, after I presented all my stuff to them. But I said, you got gigantic creatures. There was all kinds of creatures here. And of course they said, no. So now they're saying these are the earliest complex sea creatures. And this was before anything, bones or teeth or anything. They were all exotic creatures they have no clue about. And they admit that. Only they think, or they're claiming, that they were from sand, not mud, and that they were just soft-bodied and there was nothing of any material substance like bones. And the things I just showed you, these giant fingertips and everything else. And StoneHenge was the same deal. It all happened at the same time. It wasn't that long ago. They're all on the surface of the earth. They're not buried bazillion miles down. They're talking 540 million years ago. Let me read you a couple of little clips in here. Okay, you should come up and read these papers. The one I just showed you a second ago was the Yale paper, and this is in the Yale News touting their big discovery of cementing a theory about the sea creatures. No, everything was the sea because it was completely covered. And this was in 2016, a year or more after I submitted all this stuff to them. And the only reason they knew about this was because of the quirk in the chemistry, which was the silicates. And the only reason the silicates were there at this particular time because the Earth was almost impacted by Venus, which made the oceans do all this and created the Great Flood. It's unbelievable how they missed every single thing. They said at this time they were all entirely soft-bodied, and they lived before there was any shells or teeth or bones. They're just saying they were slimy creatures on the bottom of the sea, but the whole Earth was covered with ocean because we were impacted by Venus almost. So they can't figure out how they fossilized. Well, I know exactly how they fossilized. And they say because of these conditions, they could have turned them into rock within hours or years rather than thousands or millions of years. I would say within years, yes. And then they say they're rapidly buried by underwater storm events. Yes, the whole Earth was a gigantic flood. They conducted their research with microscopes. This is basically exactly what I sent to Yale. And this is to this guy right here, Derek Briggs. And then I also sent it to NASA, and NASA ended up paying Yale to do this research, which they didn't, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know what they did, but I had already given them all of that information years prior. And I even wrote a book about the frustration that I had with them. All right, yeah, this is the book I wrote in frustration. It was called Mudfossils and Velikovsky and Minds in Collision. Velikovsky wrote Worlds in Collision, and that was what caused the mudfossils. So, and this was in February 2016. Yale put out their paper in October 2016. But I had been working, trying to get them to look at my stuff for years before that. And eventually ended up doing CAT scans and DNA tests and chemistry and all that stuff. I had every little detail. And they refused to discuss it and then took credit for my work. It's just not right. All right? I love you all. Bye.
Once you know the truth, there is no excuse.